So I did hear from Bob, who said that he would not be able to make it. Otherwise, I haven't heard from folks. So, you know, I'm not sure if people want to wait a couple more minutes or just we can feel free to dive right in, which I am all in favor of. Okay, cool. So this is the third meeting, and the new addition to our meeting schedule is the video camera over here. So this is for the August 19th Comp Plan Steering Committee meeting. The agenda for the meeting has got a lot of stuff on it, so I think we can, to the extent we can kind of work our way through, that would be good. So did anyone have any public comments or any input that they wanted to provide, anything that way? I did want to bring something up about the Blueberry Festival, unless anyone else had anything. I think that overall it was a pretty successful event. Thank you to the members of the committee who were able to be there and make it happen. I know that Kathy in the planning department and Lacey, who's on the committee, worked really hard on that event in particular, and we had those 3 idea boards that were completely full of comments. And the big ideas focused on things to do with traffic, the village, and infrastructure, including sidewalks and street lights and those kinds of things. The things that people love about Gray, the library, the wildlife park, and a lot of people put down that they were pretty satisfied with the public services they get from fire and rescue and public works and the transfer station. So it was a good, I think, representation and a good start to the public input that we're going to be collecting. So overall, again, just thank you. I thought it was a really good day, and it was good to be a part of that. So the next thing on the agenda is something we've talked about a couple times before, about the committee having a chair and a vice chair from among its members. Sarah and I were talking a little bit about how this might work, if this was going to be, I think some of the questions this group needs to figure out as a group before we make decisions on who's going to be chair and what the chair is going to do are things like, is this, your one shot to be the chair for the rest of the time, or is it going to be kind of like a rotating chairpersonship? Is the role of the chair going to be pretty much to run the meetings and represent the committee to the council when they get their regular updates? Or is it going to be more working on, with the team here on setting agendas and scheduling meetings when we have to have meetings outside of our normal third Monday kind of situation? So with those questions in mind, I thought I'd just kind of throw it out for maybe some discussion to see if this was the meeting, people were ready to kind of settle that question, or if we wanted to think more about some of those specific things, take a few minutes to talk about it right now, and then maybe decide at the next meeting how the chair and vice chair should work together and work with the group. Any initial thoughts on that based on what we've talked about?
I mean, I think it's a good idea to kind of switch on and off with it, like kind of go round table. That way, everybody gets an opportunity to be part of the leadership team, I guess, of that.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you don't want to, I guess. Unless someone's like, no, I don't want to do it.
For some people, it's better.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I saw a few heads nodding as you were talking. To me, I think having a chair can serve a valuable purpose to help organize meetings, run meetings. Again, this isn't going to be, me talking to the group every time. It's going to be helping to facilitate some conversations. And I think a chair can help make that happen. And I also think that it would be very valuable to have someone on the committee representing the committee's work to the council and to the public, as opposed to someone like Sarah or me, or Doug for that matter. So we talked about, maybe a 3-month rotating membership, and we decide, that would give, probably 4 or 5, maybe 6 people a chance to do this kind of thing if they wanted to.
Do we have anyone here that has experience with this kind of thing? Because I feel like I'm still kind of figuring out how this works and what we're doing. So that I wouldn't want to start off being a chairperson because I feel like I'm still very green. So I'm wondering, is there someone here that's already ever been on a committee like this or a commission and had to do this kind of organizational thing?
I've been a board president of a organization, not
Okay.
a town committee, but
Yeah, still.
I've chaired a board.
Would you be comfortable doing for a few months? Or?
I mean, I guess I could. I wasn't.
Yeah,
Well,
I'm just-
I don't have a lot of time.
Yeah.
Time is precious right now.
So maybe part of what we do is figure out what the role is gonna be and what that, because
What
whether
that
it's just the
commitment is.
person who goes to report
I mean,
our findings or whatever to the council versus organizing, and I mean, those are really different time commitments.
Yeah.
That's true, that's true. I think
Yeah.
the better question is who wants to do it? That'd be the better question.
I mean, I think it is important. I think it is
Anyone's
important
names.
that someone do it.
I mean, we
we
could just
need-
fold the
we need
paper and
someone
put
to
it in
be.
front of us.
But it is hard to volunteer for something you don't know exactly what the parameters are.
Right, I think we should define the role,
Yeah.
and then figure out the skills needed
Yeah.
for the role, and then
Right.
figure out the person to source it.
Right.
But I agree that it's important to have somebody.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah,
Yes.
no, I think
agree.
absolutely.
Right. So initially, I think in discussions with Doug and Sarah and Stephanie from Greater Portland Council of Governments, the chair would primarily be kind of the person that we check in with in advance of the meeting to say, here's a draft agenda. Is there anything else that needs to get discussed by the group? And then they would also be the folks who would kind of be leading the way at the council meeting with support from myself and Doug at kind of either we've talked about monthly updates to the town council when things are really cooking, or maybe a quarterly update would be more appropriate sometimes. But it could be, during any 3-month period, it could be, I think a phone call in advance of every regularly scheduled meeting with this group, and then attendance at up to 3 town council meetings.
Which are Wednesday nights, right? Do you remember that right?
They're
Tuesday
Tuesday
night.
nights.
Are they monthly?
First,
Yeah.
They're monthly.
They meet pretty
It's
regularly.
It's the first Tuesday of the month, I believe.
First and third for town council?
And third, they meet
Oh,
twice a
yeah,
month.
twice a month.
Oh.
But would we be expected to go to one
One
meeting
of
per
those.
month?
One meeting
Oh.
per month,
Yeah, because we wouldn't have that much.
especially if we're on track to meet once a month ourselves. Yeah.
The other time would be sort of awkward.
Yep. So I guess with that kind of
So
baseline
is,
set.
in your vision of the chair, you would still be more or less creating the agenda, or the chair would create the agenda?
I'm starting to.
It would be a
this,
joint
but I-
process,
A
but
joint.
I think it would be more of like, here's a draft agenda based on the public participation plan we're gonna go over later this evening, and where we are in the project, and then the chair would say, well, we need an update on this other thing, or we need to look ahead at something else.
And are there gonna be, I mean, is most of the work that we're gonna do as a committee, there aren't gonna be like subcommittees of this committee, or potentially might there be, that would be doing
I
work?
think that would be a great committee decision to make at some point.
Well, I guess, I think part of my hesitation in saying, yeah, I'll be the chair.
Yeah.
Is less sort of experience and more experience with strategic planning and what is going to happen over the next
Yeah.
however many months, and not understanding things like, okay, we need to create committees, and there'll be, 2 or 3 other committees, sort of subcommittees that will be doing some kind of work. I mean, in boards that I've been involved in, there's usually a lot of work that's done sort of at the subcommittee level, and then those subcommittees bring stuff to, in the same way that we're gonna be bringing stuff to the town council, subcommittees would bring whatever things they're working on to the full committee for a full committee discussion and things like that. And I'm just wondering if that's part of the process, or if it's really just all of us meeting monthly and everything happens kind of right here, more or less.
We have not built subcommittees into the project outline as it stands right now.
Yeah.
I have encouraged folks to do homework in between meetings,
Yep.
and that's going to help our meetings be more efficient and move some things forward. But most of the inventory work, which we'll give you a quick update on here later, is complete. So, this isn't going to be the kind of scenario where we need a couple people to get data on agriculture and a couple other people to get data on the economy, which is the way some communities will do that work. The Greater Portland Council of Governments folks have already done that work.
Right, they're gonna get all that stuff for us.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think that's going to allow us to focus on, in the short term, between now and this winter, early spring, on collecting input from the community on some of the big themes and values and attitudes and visioning work that this group is going to use as the foundation for the plan. And then from next spring through next summer, really looking at how do those values and attitudes and visions translate into land use decisions. So there's really 2 phases, and we can look at the public participation plan again in a moment, but the first big phase that the steering committee is going to be making sure we're hearing from everybody we need to hear from, identifying people that we might need to proactively reach out to, helping us understand how the adequacy of what we've kind of put in the ground for a starting point on the public participation plan itself. And as the name implies, the steering committee is really just kind of keeping us honest, keeping us true to what the greater community is telling us. And the next part of that work is really, I think, going to be most valuable to be done as a full group when we start talking about the future land use map, parts of the community that are going to change faster than other parts of the community over the next 10 to 15 years, parts that are going to change very slowly, and what is that change going to look like? So I hesitate to give a subgroup or a subcommittee of this overall group a lot of that work without keeping everybody, around the table more involved.
Yeah.
So that's a good kind of primer for the public participation and input plan that we'll get to in a few minutes. But again, this is all subject to change as the group discusses it, but my view of the chair and vice chair are really going to be helping shape what we talk about in relation to the plan and what we're hearing from the community, running the meeting, being the person who's watching the clock and making sure we're advancing through the agenda the way we need to, and then also helping out the committee with the town council reporting.
So with the meeting facilitation, you guys are gonna set the agenda and then float it by the chair a week prior to the meeting here for feedback and additions. The chair would be responsible to take feedback that they've heard and add it to the agenda and then facilitate the meeting, or will you be facilitating the meeting and then with the help of the chair? How do you envision that? Like, does the chair have to be prepared to drive the entire meeting, or is that a shared responsibility?
I think it could be a shared responsibility. I think depending on who the chair is, they may have things that they really want to emphasize in the agenda and maybe take a little more ownership and leadership on. We will be at these meetings to help present information, to share some of the analysis of the information we're collecting. But I think it's important to make sure that this isn't going to be, North Star's plan for gray. It needs to be Gray's plan for gray.
And I think we said last time too, that there was some bringing to consensus that we needed to have happen. So we're not going by Robert's rules. We don't vote. We want to have more of a discussion-based consensus brought about. And that would be the chair's responsibility to facilitate that consensus in the group.
That would be my vision.
Okay.
Yeah. And then I think the question is that everyone else's vision for, and it could, again, if the group does want to have a different chair every 6 months or 3 months or whatever, then it might be a little different every single time. And that's just a function of whoever's, volunteered to take on that chairpersonship. But I think that the idea of, we've been doing a lot of the talking, a lot of the presenting, and I think that's partly a function of kind of getting the ball rolling. But, very soon we're going to be at a point where I would love to, be a supporting actor here, not the one doing all the talking.
My experience at being a chair is that oftentimes it takes a while to hit stride to understand what you're even doing, what your focus is. And I think if we're going to be rotating through chairs, then it's going to be hard for any chair to actually hit stride.
I
So,
would agree with that.
Though that may be a fair way to do it, I don't think it's going to be as effective. That's just my experience with that.
Yeah, that's a fair observation.
Maybe if we have someone start, we could say, in so many months, we'd stop and talk about it, so that the person that says today they'll do it doesn't feel like they're committing for the whole time. We could give them a chance that we would talk about it again. Do you see what I mean? In case they don't want to keep doing it, or,
Sure.
we could stop and say, let's discuss it. Do you want to continue? Is everybody content? And we'll keep going with this chair, or somebody else take over. I don't know. I'm just saying that it's a big commitment at this point for someone to say they'll do it the whole time.
My question is what the role of the vice chair is. Is that just to fill in for the chair when they're unavailable, or is it maybe someone who could fill in 6 months' time to step up into a chair position, or I guess what's the vision for that?
The way the charge for this group was written is that the group would have a chair and a vice chair, and it didn't really. It kind of left it up to the group to decide.
Okay.
But that is sort of traditionally what a vice chair is.
Right.
Somebody who fills in when the
Right.
chair can't do it and will be the next chair.
Sure.
So, at least it logically follows.
Right. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
But also if we're talking, we do have an end date. We're not around forever as a committee. So would it make sense to almost think of a chair and taking into account what you said, but also not putting too much burden on one person? Would it make sense to almost treat the chair and vice chair almost like co-chairs, so that some of the work, not all of the work necessarily falls on the chair all the time?
Yeah.
If the chair doesn't want to be the person who works on the agenda, then that task falls to the vice chair. I don't know.
And that
Just
was
sort of
one-
a division of duties.
Yeah.
The other thoughts I had is I don't want to have one person who may be the most creative one of us and most, whatever, be the chair because they have a lot of good ideas, and then they're burdened with being the chairperson, doing whatever
Watching the clock
responsibilities,
or-
and can't contribute through the way that they'd like to be able to contribute because they have the responsibilities as the chair. So that's a concern. If there are a lot of duties that the chair ends up needing to take responsibility for. So.
Maybe, it might be reasonable to sort of table the chair piece until maybe towards the end of the meeting, because I do feel also, I mean, that at this point, you know, we had one kind of introductory meeting, and then we had a second meeting which was really focused on the Blueberry Festival.
Right.
And it might be helpful for everyone just to kind of begin to get a better feel for what we're grappling with, to kind of dig into some of the other stuff, and then come back, and maybe all of us will have a better feeling at the end of the meeting about, oh yeah, I could be the chair, or, you know, we could, how we might, you know, kind of do that, so, you know, I think
That's a good idea.
I'd be into, you know, ready to just kind of start
Alright.
getting into some of this.
Yeah.
Everyone kind of cool with that idea for now?
Sure,
We'll-
yep.
We'll make sure that we save 10 minutes at the end
Yeah.
just to come back to it.
Could I go back to the Blueberry Festival for 2 quick seconds?
Yeah.
There was one gentleman when Krista and I were working at the table who really, and I think fairly, pointed out that he would wish that the survey was going to get mailed to residents, and we do understand that the money is an issue with that. But Krista had a really good idea of including the survey, or at least information about where you could go get a hard copy of the survey. His issue was that it was, if you're not if you're not a technology person, you may have trouble knowing where it is.
He also pointed out it was not, he said he was a mathematician and it was not mathematically sound what we were doing, but I tried to explain it was just a sample of a larger process.
Yes.
But you had a really
That's-
good idea to include in the tax bills, either information on where the survey is, or hey, you can pick it up in these public buildings, or, and I don't know if something like that would be possible, but I thought it was a great idea.
I don't know, Doug's not here, but I know tax bills are going out soon. I
Yep.
think they're usually mailed in
Always.
September, late August, so.
Doug did have a conversation with the assessor and the town manager and some other folks in the office about the possibility of inserting we're doing a survey. It's going to be available here. Hard copies will be available at the town office and library and transfer
Maybe a
station.
public meeting coming up, something like that. I don't know.
That's what
Yeah.
I guess.
So they did produce an insert
Oh, they did?
that
Oh,
is going
fabulous.
out
Oh, great.
to everyone who gets a tax bill.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah.
So the survey itself is not going out in a mailer,
Right, because I
but it's
figured that
a
would probably be too bulky.
it's a heads up that
Yeah.
it's happening.
Yeah,
But at least then, if you're not somebody who's gonna be on the website or something, then you're still gonna have another way to find out about it, which is
Right,
awesome.
right, yep. Doug really led the way on that one, so that
Great.
was good. So that, I think those are going out later this week, like maybe Wednesday,
that sounds
soon.
great. Yeah.
And so the survey is live now. That was part of the email I'd sent out. It will be on the town's website and the Facebook page coming up this week. And in the insert, it said the survey was going to be, I think they put a date in there of September 12th. It was 4 weeks anyway. That should give people time to take the survey over the next couple weeks, as people are aware of it from the mailing and the website. The online video is in draft form, and I'm not sure we'll have a chance to look at it, but it is also expected to be finalized this week, so we could be getting another round of awareness from that as well, which is certainly the intent. So between the information in the tax bill and the website and this video, our hope is that we can get a good response rate. It certainly will not be, I am not expecting, I should say, a statistically significant sample size where you could have, with a high degree of confidence, make statements about the general town's attitude on certain things, but I think it's going to be a good data point which will help inform the whole thing.
Could we ask the school to put it in like the first announcement, that goes out to students too? That just would be a way to get younger families to all see it.
The superintendent has a newsletter that goes out probably twice a year, quarterly. That goes to families. So That'd be a great place to put it, because
Yeah.
it gets mailed to all the homes.
Yeah.
I'm sure they're putting it in the town newsletter that goes out. They must be.
Sadly, people are much more likely to read the school newsletter than the town. I'm just saying.
I will get one.
You won't get one? No, no, my kids are middle
But-
age, but I won't get one.
So that skews the results, actually, if you don't send it out equally to everybody.
Well, yeah,
Well,
but this
it's
is just
just
one of
additional.
many
Sure.
ways
Well,
that we're
again,
doing it, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there is a place for people to put their age.
Mm-hmm.
So if we find that 3/4 of the residents who respond to this thing are under 40, we'll know we have some work to do, to hear from
Yeah.
a broader group. But I think that, again, this is going to be good input that we can take for what it is, It's not going door to door, and it's not calling people at their homes. It's just relying on people to provide us some input.
Yep.
So that leads us, I think, to the public participation plan, which is on the very next page of the handout. This is coming right from the original proposal that we put together back in March, and I'm looking on page 5 and 6. 6 is the timeline. It looks like it didn't print completely for my copy. But this, I think, will give you a sense of the overall timeline, as well as the specific tasks and the points at which we're proposing to hear from people and how we want to hear from those people. And that timeline will kind of give you a general sequence of events kind of thing that'll, I think, give you a sense of, like we talked about, we're still in task 2, which is the preliminary work, but we're also starting some of the visioning, values, and attitudes in task 3. So if you look at the timeline, we've been doing a lot of things at once as far as ground rules and how we're going to make decisions. The visioning stuff we're going to talk a little bit more about tonight. And then if you skip down to task 3, we've scheduled department head interviews for next week, I believe. So it's been a little, this is an amended timeline from what we'd originally proposed, and it's been a little more compressed at the beginning based on the deadline that the council had set for this group. So we're not going through this completely in sequence, but it's important that we're going to hit all of these things by, say, the end of November. So all of the task 1, 2, and 3 activities we should be wrapping up by Thanksgiving, I'd say. So I would be happy to walk through the specific items in task 3 and 4 at this point, and then tasks 5 and 6 really happen a little later on in the project timeline. Is that a good way to keep going with this? Okay. So where we are now is really on the values and visioning. We're in task 3, and the big activities here that we've already started are the idea boards that we'd had out for the first time at the Blueberry Festival. The online video and the survey are in progress right now. We should start to see survey results coming in as soon as this week. The staff interviews are what we scheduled for next week. And then I'd left some time to talk about task 3.4 later in this agenda, but I will talk about it right now. This is what we had called community workshops. So as opposed to a survey that people go onto their computer to submit, or where you come to the Blueberry Festival and we happen to grab people as they walk by, which is essentially what was happening. This is where we get a space and invite people to come talk to us. And this could be the kind of thing where it's in a gym or a larger building, like a cafeteria at a school, something like that, where you might have 60, 80, maybe 100 people. coming to listen to a little bit about what we've learned as a group as we start getting into the data, and telling us through some focused activities what's important to them, what the priorities are for the future, and what they are hoping to see the town ready to react to, things that are opportunities to take advantage of. So that's what I mean by a community workshop. That's a large community scale kind of event. And then the focus groups that are part of that same task would be following up on some of the things that Joel had mentioned, where, if, the only people who come to this community workshop are people of a certain demographic, or people with a, narrow interest, or if they all have something in common, we're going to want to be able to make sure that we can hear from a broader range of folks. So as part of that discussion, I think some conversation with this group in advance about, who are those classes of residents that we want to make sure we hear from. And, real life example from town next door in Windham, we had our community workshop on a Saturday, which was also state football championship. So we didn't have a lot of parents of school-age kids. We didn't have a lot of youth sports people. So we had to make sure that we did some extra work to hear from them. So that's the kind of thing by focus groups. It is, proactively identifying, maybe 3 to 5 to 7 people of a certain interest group. Another group we didn't hear from in a different session was there were no farmers, and that was an important aspect in that particular town. So we made sure we found a time that worked, and met with them for an hour and a half and talked about some of the same kind of questions, because we wanted to hear the same info, but it was really tailored more for individual groups.
Who is responsible for following up with those focus groups? Would it be members of this committee, or staff here for town, or yourself, or
Yeah.
a combination?
The idea is we as a group would come up with, some ideas for those community workshops. What's the information we want to get from people? How might we do that? And there's a number of ways you can facilitate groups at small tables or in a, kind of an open house kind of situation. I would expect Sarah and I and the folks from GPCOG to do a lot of the actual facilitation and presenting at those meetings. But when it comes to the focus groups, it'd probably be more of the same. Those would be open to members of the committee to attend. I think, they would be public, just like the public workshops are public, except we're being a little more tailored as to the invitations that go out.
Same with the workshops you're talking about. Who's going to organize those? And I know we discussed maybe a few different options, but like, who is going to be responsible for that? Would that be the chair, or would that be you, or community, or the?
Yeah, we would draft up an agenda for that meeting.
Okay.
And, again, it would probably include some presentation components as well as some interactivity components that we're hearing from people and not just talking to them. We should okay that as a group. That's more than just a chair discussion with town staff, I think. But, some of the initial thoughts, if I have questions and need to make a phone call or send an email to bounce an idea off someone, it would probably be the chair as opposed to the whole group. And then we would talk about that at a meeting. So hopefully that answers your question. The idea is the heavy lifting for that would be, finding a place, arranging for, materials and refreshments and those kinds of things. We would be working with Doug and the town planning department on. we may absolutely, you should expect to be called upon to help facilitate potentially those small group tables, or just kind of be available to hear from people, either in, like at the Blueberry Festival, just kind of recording some quick thoughts, or maybe some other kinds of dialogue with poster boards and those kinds of things. So the details for that meeting have not been worked out, but the expectation is that we would be kind of setting up some framework that would get modified and approved by this group, and then the details would get hammered out with staff. So I think the preparation is going to be getting this group to give a thumbs up on the approach to the meeting, and then having people show up maybe an hour ahead of the event, so we could make some assignments about who's going to be manning the sign-in table, and who's going to be, recording information on that wall, and who's going to be at each individual table. We can make those decisions at the meeting.
So we'll be doing that, I assume, next meeting.
Yes.
So these are in October.
Yes. And agenda item 8, next meeting. Our next meeting is scheduled for September 16th.
Right.
And we need to start discussing the logistics of that meeting then. And I think it's going to be, again, open for discussion about, we had a special meeting on August 5th to prep for the Blueberry Festival.
Yeah.
Are we going to need to have another meeting as a group, prior to that October meeting?
So are we gonna set the date for the October, what do you call it, community workshop at the September meeting?
I would love to, as we get toward the end of this meeting, to have some idea of dates that could work,
Okay.
even if they're just penciled in.
It's close.
Short notice.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
If, for example, you're looking at a mid-October date, you should be advertising the last week of September, like things in the paper,
Yeah.
posters around town, things on the website. I think 2 weeks is the absolute minimum. 3 or 4 weeks is much
Yeah.
better.
Ben, do you have your Gantt chart here with more detail that we could have, such as the assignee and the subtasks within each of these?
This is the amount of detail we put it into.
Okay.
What
It would be
additional
helpful
detail?
it would be helpful for me to know that this particular workshop has to be scheduled, you have to find a location to have it.
Yeah.
And we need to assign that to somebody and have it done in 2 months. So it would be helpful for me to see that upcoming work list I think in more detail than what I have access to with the person that's gonna do it. So like, task, resource, due date would be a more complete picture of this month, and maybe we could just do it for a month at a time. But this to me is very vague, because I haven't written a comprehensive plan before. I don't have the big picture in my head like you do. And it's difficult for me to kind of figure out where we're at in terms of what's next. So I feel a little bit surprised that we have something that we really need to be doing within a week or two. It needs to be done.
That, to your first point, I think it is absolutely reasonable to have us prepare something that we could update it maybe every 2 to 3 months, that would look out the next 2 to 3 months. That would give you a little more detailed visibility about some of the short-term activities. The second part of it is when it comes to scheduling the room or getting notices up on the website or in the paper, that my expectation is that we would be doing that in conjunction with Doug, the planner, and his folks. The role of this group would be to, let's set that stuff aside and really focus on what do we know that there are certain things we're going to need to leave that meeting with as far as input from the community when it comes to the vision statement or prioritizing future town services. They're starting to make decisions on, do we need more residential or more commercial, or more residential over here and less residential over there. Those kinds of decisions we will start to introduce to the community at a first workshop. How we do that, I think, is very much what I would be relying on this group for at a discussion at the September 16th meeting. So we can talk more about the nuts and bolts and, the choreography, the agenda for that meeting at that point. But to your point, Alicia, there is a lot of maybe behind the scenes things that it's going to take to get ready that from our standpoint would just be behind the scenes. But I think if it's not unfair to give you a sense of what that entails.
Yeah, for example, I think given our experience getting ready for the Blueberry Festival, we can plan on needing another meeting. So that
Right.
we should probably look to schedule because for just the Blueberry Festival, we had another meeting.
Yes.
So that would make sense to me that we would need another one, to get ready for this. Which sounds like it might be a little bit bigger than planning for the Blueberry Festival.
Right. So, in the original proposal to the town, there were 2 public meetings, public workshops scheduled at this point in the process. And that was based on the, assumption or proposal that having a couple dates for people to choose between would be something the town would want to see. And the example might be, a weeknight evening and a Saturday morning. Or a, off council Tuesday night and a Thursday night, or whatever seems to make sense for Gray. And I think that's something that I would, defer to this group. I think number one question is, do we want to put all of our eggs in one basket and just have one big meeting, which would be one way to go. And then if we're going to look at 2, because I see everybody shaking their head, are there thoughts about, the weekend, weekday, or 2 weekday evenings, or how that would go? My presumption was that we would have, some weeknight after dinner kind of thing, and then a Saturday morning, we'll be out of here by lunch kind of thing.
I think that's perfect.
Yeah, I think that works for most people.
Okay.
I don't know what time sports end for like soccer and
That's a good point.
football games.
Yeah.
But between a weeknight and a Saturday morning, I bet people could make one or the other. I think.
Or you might want to do Saturday afternoon, because a lot of activities take place either for parents, either after school in the evening or in the mornings on Saturday.
Gotcha.
So should, at that point, if we're gonna do a weeknight and a weekend, should I just try and coordinate with Doug about morning or afternoon on a Saturday and which weeknight would be best?
Maybe when space is available also
Yeah,
might
that
be
would
an
be
issue.
helpful to know,
That could be a
right.
factor, yeah, for sure.
And what do we have to have done as a committee before these focus groups? So these focus groups are about the vision, the value statement, so we should at least be down the road with those, right? Or
Yeah.
have a clean working copy? What's the expectation? We have a vision statement, we have a draft, we have.
Right. The focus groups would follow the community workshops, and there would be, we could have anywhere between 2 and maybe 4 or 5, depending on the groups we identify that we need to do additional outreach to. So we've reserved space in the schedule and the project budget to do that work, but it's impossible for me to say right now exactly what that would look like. It's more of a reaction to who shows up to these.
I thought our question was, at the actual community workshop, how do we ask people about their vision? How do we ask them about their values? Similar to probably what you did at the Blueberry Festival, but in a
Right,
different
like-
format.
Like, meaning what do we as a group have to have done for these deliverables that are impending
Right.
in 2 meetings?
So the idea is, in general, we have the chapters, the inventory chapters are, I think the ag chapter is the last chapter that's not complete. So we've got a lot of data from Greater Portland Council of Governments, from the state, from the census, and from planning and codes that we need to develop some highlights from. And to me, I'm not sure it says it in this version of what you have in front of you, but in the proposal, we talked about that as being what we've learned, right? We want to start this public process formally with folks from a common understanding of what the trends are telling us, what the demographics are telling us, and just kind of a more data-driven view of what has been happening in Gray, and kind of ask the question, is it, based on those trends, if those trends were to continue, is that okay? Are these good trends? Are they trends that we need to think about altering some way?
Can I ask a question? Because I kind of like looked over, didn't study it, but looked over the 2003 comprehensive plan. And, the vision and a lot of the goals and all sound a lot like the kind of things that we're talking about now. I mean, it seemed almost like we could write this plan, it just seemed like, you know what I mean? It just seemed like it had the same concerns, the same as we seem to have when we talked about it and what people are saying so I guess my question is did the 2003 plan shape things that happened in Gray? Like, was the Wilderness Way thing having to do with the plan and addressing traffic in Gray? Did it affect positive? There's no way of us to know.
There should be, and there may be people around this table who can give you a little bit better answer than I can. Doug can give you a better answer than I can. Part of what we're going to be doing is going through that 2003 plan with department heads and with Doug to say, did we do 20% of the things on this list or 50% of the things on this list? And
Because it seems like it's the same concerns, the same, as we have.
it's the same
now.
state checklist
Yeah.
that we looked at the last meeting, where the state requires certain elements to be addressed in a municipal comprehensive plan. One of the things that I'm hoping we can talk a little bit more about a little further down in the agenda again is, what does Gray need in this plan that's going to make it relevant and more actionable than just something that the state requires?
Right, just a vague statement, yeah.
So I want to come back to that, and I want to come back to, the details of these October meetings. But just to kind of finish the overview, task 4 is really, I said there's kind of a phase 1 and phase 2 here. Phase 1 is the visioning and attitudes and values. Phase 2 is where you start to transition those into what does that mean for land use. And Doug, has said this is going to be a very critical conversation in the community. We have identified a need for a second survey, and I think we talked about that at our first meeting. Rather than do one survey at the beginning of this process, just ask, a survey that's focused on those more general vision and values up front, and then we can start to get into actual types of development actual locations of development in a future land use conversation that'll happen through that survey and through a second round of community meetings.
Can I ask a question? The survey, the current survey, by the time we announce this, community workshop, that survey, we will have already ended taking feedback on that survey, correct? Most
Potentially,
likely.
yes, yeah.
Because, I mean, I'm guessing part of the community workshop is presenting the results of that survey.
That's part of what we've learned, or what we will have.
Right, what we've learned, yeah. I'm just thinking, it's like, it seems like it'd be nice when we, like, if, you know, when we announce the date of this community workshop, to also be sort of be able to promote the survey as a way of, you know, kind of leading up to this is one of the things, this survey is gonna be discussed at the community workshop.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
But I don't know how, with the timing and everything like that, I'm not sure how that might work, unless we come up with a date for it tonight.
Yeah, I
or
mean,
that.
I think if, you know, we keep the survey open till the end of September, and our meeting's gonna be on October 3rd, there probably won't be a lot of time
Well,
to,
that's,
Right.
right, I mean, you
But
need
it-
time to be able
Right.
to take all the data and come
but
up
I
with.
think, you know, that if we do leave the survey open for 4 or 5 weeks, and this, October meeting, you know, the first one's not till the middle of October, for example, that would leave a couple weeks to, you know, do some prep. And I think that, part of, you know, your idea about, you know, kind of, what I heard was, you know, use that idea of having a discussion about that specific thing as part of, you know, a reason to get folks to
Right,
come
that-
talk with us, yeah.
Basically, yeah,
Yeah.
sort of, yeah.
Yep.
We heard what you said, let us tell you what we think, or what we think you said to us.
Right, I mean, the people who, I guess we wanna make sure that the people who are coming to the meeting will have already had an opportunity to give some feedback through the survey, hopefully. And it seems like the two should be connected somehow.
Or maybe they didn't, and now they want to disagree.
Right,
Make some
or,
sort of build
or
on
once,
it.
or they hear about the meeting, and so then that's an opportunity for them to participate in the survey.
Right. So, you know, I think too, a bigger point is, you know, this conversation about a comprehensive plan is not gonna be over until, next November 2020. And, my hope is that that's really just kind of a milestone in the process. The draft plan is, scheduled to be, presented to the council in October, and they want to have a referendum, public referendum, you know, voters voting on a plan. And at that point, you know, presuming that the plan is adopted by the voters, you know, as soon as, you know, that meeting in December, that council could be talking about, you know, what are we going to implement first?
You may not know, but what is the contingency plan if the town does not adopt the comprehensive?
I have not spoken with Doug
I mean, it's a
about that.
possibility, so I'm just curious.
It's
Yeah.
absolutely a possibility. I think we can minimize the chances of that happening by doing our very best to keep people informed and involved throughout the process.
Yeah.
So, not a totally satisfying answer. So, you know, once we get through the future land use discussion, we will have, at that point, we will be working on a draft of the forward-looking part of this plan. The inventory work that Greater Portland Council of Governments has done so far, that's the, everything looking back, it's kind of how we got to where we are today. And then task 6 is about the future-looking part. You know, what are we going to do based on what's important to us and based on the priorities? Let's make some very specific recommendations about moving forward. So the draft plan review is really about, you know, that's online video number 3. It's getting people to provide us some comments and direction on the draft plan itself and not just elements or concepts within the overall plan. And then it moves on into task 7, which is the formal adoption process with council. This group needs to hold a public hearing on the plan. The council needs to vote to put it on a referendum and the actual vote itself.
Is there no town workshop regarding the draft plan? I see that in the details there, it just says comments to be submitted by email. We're not having another workshop.
Well, that's certainly something we can talk about. In other communities, it has been pretty common to say, you know, we've got a draft plan and, you know, it's, you know, 85% at this point. You know, come help us finish it off. Help us, you know, prioritize. You know, these are all the recommendations, for example. You know, this is another chance for you to tell us which ones are the most important recommendations.
Right.
So as we get closer to that, we, making a note to talk about that.
It might just give people an opportunity also to add something we may have overlooked before it's finalized.
Or tell us they won't vote for it if certain things aren't included.
Right, exactly.
All right. So if we're running a little behind, but I'd be interested in hearing people's thoughts on this. I'm not sure if people have had a chance to really absorb it much ahead of the meeting, but based on this discussion, if people have initial reactions or thoughts, you can certainly share those by email or at the start of the next meeting would be appropriate as well. But if people have anything they want to say before we move on,
I just think
that'd be
before
great.
the October meeting, our homework should be to read the 2003, so people say, da-da-da-da, and you know where they're coming from, they've read the old one, so if you haven't ever read it, you've read it 2 years ago, take a couple of days to read it.
Yeah.
And really digest it and have your own thoughts. So we don't sound like we don't know our history.
Yep, that's a good point.
So one of the things that's listed at the end is that there's gonna be a page on the Gray website. When is that? That's not up yet, correct?
There is a comprehensive plan page that needs to be updated. It still has the application to be on this committee.
Right.
And there's some information which is good, which we can, you know, recommend keeping, that, you know, why do you do a comp plan? What is the value of a comp plan to a community? But I think there needs to be more meeting materials. There needs to be more highlights of the discussions we're having, and, you know, so people who want to check in to see what we've been up to can easily find agendas and notes and supporting materials.
Meeting recordings and.
Meeting recordings, those are going to be available, right?
You know, what might be helpful too is like, depending on where we are, what, like, we're talking about, what meeting and what we're talking about, is if we could have like maybe a Cliff Notes version of the plan, or what the current plan in Gray and where it pertains to in this, so you're not reading through, you know, 200 and some pages, like, you know, task 3 deals with this, or not task 3, but like task 4 deals with these pages. So this is where we're gonna be concerned with on the current plan, or like, so some ideas of the current plan. And
The 2003 plan.
yeah, that's what I mean, yeah.
Yeah,
It's
I mean-
broken down to like 8 subheadings, so it's pretty straightforward: traffic, housing,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. So it's not so bad to find it.
Sure. I guess more I was looking at is more like, we're gonna talk about future land use or something like that. Maybe it's 3 sections that deal with that.
Mhm.
You know, maybe we would wanna have an idea of what these 3 sections
Yeah.
mean, or something.
Yeah, I
So-
think you've done something similar here tonight, where you included the vision statement here,
Mhm.
since
Right.
we were talking about it.
And not the whole thing,
Right.
not the whole plan.
Yeah.
Right.
Just the area that
Just
we're
the
talking
area we're
about today.
focusing about
Yeah.
today, yeah.
I think at an organizational level for this committee, it would be helpful to me if we had minutes and action items, because I feel like we're a little bit covering the same territory. And I think we have, our time is short. Obviously, this is a truncated timeline based on what you're telling us. And so I think it is reasonable for us as a committee to have action items to bring back and homework to do, such as reading the plan and, taking a crack at crafting a vision statement or something like that. But that's helpful for me to distill through all of the information is just minutes and an action item column and the person that's doing it. And then we don't have to review so much.
Does require someone taking it.
It does. I was just thinking that as I sit in front of a computer not typing.
Doug and I have talked about that, and there is I think a sense from the council that there should be more meeting minutes as opposed to the meeting notes
Yes.
that we've produced. The meeting notes are, essentially an annotated agenda with, some bullet points about decisions and discussion points, as opposed to minutes, which are more detailed and have a little bit more flavor, I think, of the conversation, maybe is how I'd characterize it. So we're talking about how to do that. I think as more of the running the meeting and the logistics of the meeting can go to a member of this group, maybe that would make it a little easier for us to take some more detailed minutes. Doug has also talked about, maybe there's, some things he can do that way as well. So I think that part of the value of minutes is for this group to understand, who's supposed to be doing what and giving a little more idea. But it's also valuable to the folks who are looking over our shoulder, whether they're in the council or just, members of the public at large who are interested in, maybe they took a survey or maybe they came to a meeting and they want to know that, that just hasn't disappeared into the ether, that there's some action and we're actually doing something with that input. So that's going to be something we continue to talk about. What is the best form for these meeting notes or minutes, and how do we make them available to people? My sense is that there's a lot more we could do with the comp plan webpage than, we just got to make it happen. So any other thoughts on the plan? Think about it and send them in. We want to hear it. This is it's a draft participation plan, and there are things, if we need to reshape things, move things around, those are the conversations we need to have. I'd like to skip item 5 on the agenda, which is final document considerations. That, I think, is going to be a very interesting discussion, and it's been on the last couple agenda items, but we just haven't had a chance to get to it. If we can get to that tonight, I'd love to come back to it, but I want to make sure we have enough time to hit these last couple points as well. So the comp plan element for this evening is the vision statement, and I wanted to spend a little time talking about that because it really is an important part of the overall comprehensive plan, but it's also going to be one of the main things we want to have a better handle on once we're done the October workshops. And the exercise I'd like to go through tonight in maybe 15 or 20 minutes with folks is just to read. In the 2003 plan, it was broken down into a values statement and a vision statement. And I'd like to get a sense of, and maybe just have a little bit of a free-flowing discussion on what parts of this are still relevant. What parts of this really resonate with people, and what, for those of you who've had some conversations with neighbors or people at the Blueberry Festival, are there elements of this plan, of this vision statement, I should say, that we might want to propose to carry forward? Or, the opposite side is, are there just things in here that are really not relevant to Gray's next 10 years? Or are there things here that are maybe too vague to be valuable, or just kind of general thoughts? So if you know, if you had a chance to read it, great. If you need a couple minutes right now, go ahead and walk through that, and when I see people look up, we can start to have a bit of a conversation about that. It is not uncommon for me to fill the silence by talking, but it's not uncommon for towns to have very different approaches to how they do. Some folks love the short and sweet. Other towns have a 2-page vision statement that gets into a lot of detail. Some towns want to keep that detail but break it out into other sections so that the more relevant portions of the vision are more closely related to other elements of the plan, like the future land use map might have some vision type statements, looking forward kind of statements associated with it.
The list, and I'm sorry, I didn't look at these, but the list of links you gave us to other town plans,
Yeah.
are any of those similar in size to Gray and or,
Some are.
do you know what I was just wondering what another town, you know what I mean, what other vision and value statements look like
And excuse me, I got a little frog in my throat. I would also hold those plans up. I think they're all very different looking documents, but they all have really neat ideas when it comes to design and layout.
Right, I know that's
and
why you
using
put it.
colors and those kinds of things. But they also all do have different approaches to how they present a vision for their communities. So some of those communities are very big,
Right.
or not in Maine. Some of them are much more comparable, I think, to Gray. So I wouldn't let the size of the community dictate what you'd want to see in your vision. But for tonight's discussion purposes, I really want to try and get a sense from this group about, on the continuum of a very vague, kind of open-ended vision statement or a very detailed directive kind of vision statement.
So I was hoping to see one that had a very sort of concrete, detailed
So
one,
if you look at this one,
to get a sense of that.
so this is the Fort Collins plan sample plan that you sent, and they've got a vision, couple of sentences, and then they've got livability, community, sustainability as 3 keywords from their plan, their vision, and then they've really gotten into detail underneath,
Oh, that's neat.
which is kind of interesting because it kind of builds up into this vision, and it's kind of laid out in a way that you can see that there's a strategy to get there,
Yeah, I
which
would
might have been missing from our last.
Yeah,
one.
that was what I was gonna say,
Yeah.
that what's really striking for me is that this
Yeah,
just seemed like
this seems
there's like one large value statement, but there's nothing actionable under, particularly the vision statement, which typically has things that are more measurable, more
Yeah,
actionable.
and
Right, there's
further
nothing
in
that's
this,
bad.
No, it's
just
very
not
grand, kind of
concrete.
vague.
Yeah.
Well, it
She's
seems like
gonna
it's
pull it up.
something that
Very
could have
general.
been written about almost any town.
anywhere, yeah.
It's
We're like-
is not terribly
Like, I don't think
specific
we need to
Gray
say we're
necessarily.
proud of our accomplishments, I mean, like, that's, it's not really a
they've got
value,
outcomes as well.
I don't know.
So that particular plan for Fort Collins also has another slide, the next slide, which is 10. I think she's trying to bring it up so you guys can see it, but they have the policy framework to get there and the outcomes to
Right.
measure it by.
Yeah, that vision statements
Which
I've
is-
seen are because there's the values, which is the overarching, vision's usually more actionable.
So, I have heard some community, which will remain nameless, but the committee that I was working with said, our vision statement from the current plan, it's all mom and apple pie. And it's, we're gonna be a proud, inclusive community for all people. And it doesn't provide direction for counselors and volunteers and planning board members to actually do something with.
To make that true.
So, on one hand, some communities will go for a more general vision statement saying it maximizes our flexibility to act in the future.
Or not.
Or not. And you could justify almost anything by, the vision and the comp plan. Other communities will get more detailed and make specific recommendations about specific parts of town. And that can provide some very affirmative direction to counselors and future town councils, but it may be, not the approach that Gray wants to use. I personally, you don't have to be on one end or the other, but my preference is for a little more detailed rather than a little more vague, because even though people do need flexibility and they do need the ability to react to things that as they change over time, the value of a planning effort like this is that you're cataloging, recording, and using what you hear from people when it comes to priorities and needs and desires, and putting that into a form that a town council could make decisions on.
You
I'm
could have,
wondering-
oh, sorry, no, go ahead.
I was just wondering if that specificness is maybe what was missing from the past plan, like you alluded to, that it seems like a lot of the same issues are recurring, and the vagueness of the the vision and value statement, maybe what we need is to nail down some more of those specifics. I mean, I have some specific ideas, I'm sure everyone has something specific that they wanna hone in on, but to get a consensus of what those are, and then actually maybe not like specifically lay it out here, but I think we do need to specifically address some things in this town, because certain things haven't changed in the last, year since the last plan, so.
I think you can have both. You can have an overarching vision or a value, or really it's the values statement that's kind of a more broad statement about what's ideal about the town. And then you can have the vision, which is more actionable.
Steps to
Steps to
get
get
there,
there,
to
to get to
achieve
the
it.
values.
I
Yeah.
thought maybe being too detailed, so you don't get yourself in trouble
No,
later on
you're-
when you didn't
no,
put a
no,
sidewalk
yeah.
on,
No,
this
not that,
specific
not
block
that
or
actionable.
something.
It's
Yeah.
more just like overall goals for, can be put in like one or two sentences.
Yep.
and,
Who do we want to be when we grow
bullets.
up?
Yeah.
I think that's one way, a very simple question that, you could ask, how do you want people from outside of Gray to talk about Gray 10 years from now? That is, one way to look at a vision statement, and it could give you a little more specificity without saying we're going to do this here and we're going to do this there and so forth. Another question that I think is a useful way to think of a vision statement is if a friend of yours moved out of town and came back 20 years from now, and you were going to take them on a tour of the community, what would you show them? What would they recognize? What would they be surprised to see? Those kinds of things as you think about the future, either as, someone from outside of the community who's going to be looking at Gray, or as, you yourself being put in a position of, what would you want to highlight in the future? So it's not necessarily, I think it's separating out some of those values from, what is this town going to actually look like and feel like, and what is the experience of Gray Village going to be like in 10 or 15 years, and what is Libby Hill going to be like in 10 or 15 years, and what is Route 26 going to be like in 10 or 15 years. So you can start to get into some of the specifics without getting into, this is all going to lead into the vision, and then the goals and the recommendations sit under that, and the future land use plan is also going to sit under that. So after the October sessions, we will have a draft vision statement that is going to carry us through. But we're specifically, when it comes to the draft plan, gonna come back to the vision statement and say, is this vision statement that we drafted 9 months ago, how do we need to update that based on what we're seeing? And this is Fort Collins.
Yeah. Can we do that with our statement that we?
Yeah, I think there's some other good examples in here. I'm glad, people are talking about the Fort Collins one because it is a very nice, planning document. And we may not get a chance to talk about it, but specifically with Gray in the 2003 vision statement, do people have thoughts? And I'm even thinking are there specific lines or words in here that we want to think about as a group, and what might, for example, if this were going to be an exercise at the October meetings, if we wanted other people in the community to think about the vision statement, what would we want them to look at?
I think a line that I think is worth evaluating and potentially keeping is that the environmental assets are not sacrificed for short-term economic gains.
That was what I pulled out.
Yeah, I love it, but has it been true since
Well,
2003? I don't think so.
I think we have to be optimistic.
I think also that the community where people desire to live, learn,
Yeah.
work, and play versus driving
Right,
through to
exactly.
somewhere else.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
makes- like people want to stop here and stay here.
Well, I
versus-
think that's the biggest
keep
thing
going.
that's happened is Gray is a place that
pass
people
through.
drive through.
Yeah.
It is, we say crossroads, but a lot of time, what that really means is they're getting off the pike to
Crossing
save the
through.
toll.
Through road.
Yeah, right.
I mean, it is, it's a huge toll. That's what people do.
This current vision statement appears to be a little down on Gray. Like Gray was maybe having a identity crisis or something when this was written, because it's almost a little sad at the beginning. And then it gets into a vision statement. But I think the beginning of it, we're at a crossroads, every community is, we don't need to pull that with us. I do like the environmental asset line. I like the live, learn, work, and play. I think that's great. But I think other than that,
The word crossroad was a very big term back then because they didn't know how else to talk about Gray. And so it was one of the buzzwords that people kind of liked and used, whether it was the right word to use, but they just used it a lot. Now it's the heart of it all. Well, so is everyone else at the heart of it all. So
Yeah.
there's overused terms that just
Yes.
Yeah.
need to,
this was a buzzword,
yeah.
Well,
thinking outside the box.
Yeah, I mean, I think heart of it all is talking about the town in the context of outside the town, and I think our job is to really look at the town within the context
Right.
of the town
Right,
itself,
right.
and not necessarily how the town relates to the neighboring towns or
Yeah.
any of that. So I think the
Great.
vision statement has to be about,
What's unique here?
about the place.
Or what do we want to be unique here? Who do we want to be? I mean, we are very largely residential. A lot of, conversation is that we're a bedroom community of Portland, but I don't want us to be viewed by us or by anybody else as, we're just a bedroom
The
community of
bedroom
Portland.
community,
We're
yeah.
just, that's, again, that's connected to Portland, is how we're related to them. Who are we related to us? Who are we?
The gateway to the Lakes region.
I mean, we are what we are, right? So we are part of that bedroom community. but
Sure.
We can still be like the quaint little, New England town that, Gray is, with that, like the gentleman said at the last meeting, requiring like a code for buildings that they all have to look a certain way and nice and neat, and, I think we need to figure out how that is gonna, while growing and, being part of the town, the bedroom community, as you said, how are we gonna embrace that, but still stay quaint, I guess?
Yeah, and not just the bedroom community in Portland where people work, but, okay, so people live in Gray, they work in Portland, they shop in North Windham, they vacation here, they do this there, and they don't do anything here.
Yeah,
That's not who I want Gray to be.
yeah.
But I think you're right, but I would also argue that the final sentence of this vision statement, where the town of Gray becomes the community where people desire to live, learn, work, and play, I think we should have more faith in ourselves in that now.
It is.
Yeah.
Well, it's true,
I-
because
I
a
mean,
lot
I-
of us do want to live here
Right,
and
and
stay
you're,
here.
you're
Yeah.
right that we go outside of our town to shop and to work, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure I don't want to be proud of where I am now also. There's something about that sentence that I don't like the way
Yeah.
it sort of assumes that we're not good enough. We want to be better, we want to do more, we want to have more, but we're
But a
still
lot
good
of it-
now.
A lot of it does go back to the traffic and the way the center of our town is, that we don't have a sense of a town that, you know what I mean? There's no place, everybody just wants to get through that center
We
of
don't
town.
have a vibrant downtown.
There's
Right.
no,
We have to
and
change that.
people keep trying
So
to start
maybe
little
that's-
businesses there, but everybody wants to just drive through, so they never go
Yeah,
unless you're
but look at
McDonald's.
Portland. If you say I live in Portland, you embrace its different neighborhoods
Mhm.
and you just say, Portland's a place to come for this and this and this. So it's not like you have to say we have to have a village that's vibrant, because maybe we never will have a village center that's vibrant, but like the other aspects, because you've got different neighborhoods and pockets. So
Yeah, but I still think there's something to be said for having a place where you see other people, you see each other, and I don't know.
Yeah.
I think that has held Gray's community aspect back, that there's been so much traffic through that center, which is a very nice little main street of town, you know, I mean, it could be a very nice little place, but,
And
Yeah.
I don't know that traffic is the biggest issue with growth in the city or the village and developing it. As a matter of fact, the mid-coast towns, they decided that they wanted the traffic to go through. They didn't want bypasses
true.
around their
Yeah.
towns,
yeah.
because that is where all their money comes from the people driving through their town, getting stuck there, you know,
Wisconsin.
trying to find a place to park.
Stepping
and
off, having a meal.
just, you know, they wanted that, so I wouldn't rule that out and say that we want to get rid of all the traffic. I think there are places where we may want to change where the traffic is flowing, if it's through like our residential areas. But through the town itself, the village itself, that may be where we
Yeah.
do want.
That's a point.
Could we start the visioning process with a vibrant downtown being one of our sort of things?
It seems
that
like
we
there's
wanna
so
work
much
at?
potential there.
There's so
And
much
it's
potential.
all so close together, the school, the library, you know, everything is right there.
I think-
And what I
think
hear is
need
we
to develop
want,
it.
we
Yeah.
want a vibrant downtown that preserves the rural character or preserves the, preserves the quaint Maine
Yeah.
feel.
Not
And I think
condemn.
that's been important to a lot of people, that at the Blueberry Festival, people were talking
We
about
definitely
that.
heard that over and over again. People
Yeah.
want investment in making this more of a town center that we can walk
Yeah.
through and also drive through,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. And I think the Blueberry Festival for me was so eye-opening. I'd never been before, and we have a great community. And I've never seen that aspect of our community, because there's no draw for us to come together, and that's what your, you know, that's what your village will do. But our village is not really conducive to gathering or shopping or doing things.
And that's what everyone sees when they,
Yeah.
that's what you see, and there's nowhere to go or do,
Right.
and people
Well,
are
and it's-
confused about where they're supposed to go,
And
and.
it's what we talked about before, because you can't, I mean, you would not want children crossing that street. I mean, so there's no people walking around, because it's just dreadful to
Well, and
try
that's
to
where we
cross.
need the infrastructure to fix that,
Right.
so it's like, you gotta.
Yeah, because the library, like everyone says, is this lovely place for everyone to go, but you've
There's
got
no
to drive
sidewalk
there.
to get there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Well, we have land, I mean, we have space. It'll be good to get the inventory chapters kind of to go through, because I think you can get a sense of what we already have. And what, like, I know we've lost two restaurants. You know, we lost the Frisky Whisk.
No more breakfast.
There's no more breakfast place.
Somebody put that on the board as something they wanted, was a breakfast place.
yeah,
And part of the
Really?
problems with things like that surviving is it's just a little bit too spread out.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, but like I went to Hollowell this weekend with my husband, and we did some antique shops, went out to dinner at the Liberal Cup, and then went to Slate's. So it was 3 businesses that,
Right.
generated money because we were out of the truck walking around. And
Yeah.
it does keep people moving and stopping and,
I was just in Booth Bay Harbor, it's the same thing,
Same
it's so
deal.
trafficky, but it's very walkable too, so
Mhm.
it's just, there's things to do and stop and see.
It's trafficy because people are going there.
Right.
People are-
They're not
Yeah.
going through there.
No, but we drove through Wiscasset on the way there, and you're driving right through, but that's just as
Sure.
busy.
yeah.
Yeah, so,
And I look at things like the strip mall, why is half of it empty? Like, I mean, that's just like businesses, like who owns that? Who's not promoting their space? Like, stuff like that. I wish we could like address those people and those owners that could like revitalize their
Or
space
across
and
the
have
street.
like a huge impact, yeah, exactly, on
So
what
Ben,
people
what is?
see when they come to this town.
Yeah,
Or
'cause,
like
like, what
Manny's
is
Motors,
that?
I
How
love
is
Manny's
that?
Motors, but I don't wanna look at, it's like,
Right.
that's what everyone sees
the
when
first
they,
thing you
it's
see.
like,
But like, why
junkyard.
is that happening? Or, what, do we know? Do we have a sense of why we have so many open storefronts and?
Not exactly. One of the things that we need to do, and this discussion has kind of raised the issue, is I'd mentioned those inventory chapters are almost complete. The ag and open space chapter is the one that's currently outstanding. What is the best way for this group to take a look at that information? In the past, it's been using the website, and people can kind of read those draft chapters on their own as they go through. You may want to walk through inventory chapters as a group during these meetings. I think that our meeting time might be better used than going through the reports of things that people could read on their own. But it is, I would like to, let me put it this way. I need to summarize a lot of the information and come up with highlights and really the foundation for the presentation at those October things is going to be what we learned from the idea boards, what we learned from the survey, and what comes out of the draft chapters that GB Cogs drafted up. I think a great homework item would be to get those posted and have people take a look at those by the September 16th meeting and just say, look, I learned this, or I thought this was really interesting. And then kind of reflect that back. That would help shape. Because if you guys are learning things from these chapters, then it might be worth also sharing with a larger community.
It might be worthwhile to divide up some of the
Yeah.
chapters
Yeah.
also. I mean, I think everyone should read everything, but if in addition to that, each person was sort of responsible for focusing on one section, or, I mean, if you have 2 or 3 people that are sort of, okay, I'm gonna focus on this, then it also, it allows for a little bit of deeper dive into a section, so it doesn't become the whole thing doesn't become a blur.
Like the Cliff
And
Notes
then,
idea for each other.
yeah, and then that person or people can kind of report back to the group, and maybe something will come out of that that otherwise we would have missed because we're trying to take everything in.
I really like that
Yeah.
idea, cause I mean, how many, I'm sorry, I don't remember how many there are, but the chances of us all being able to do a deep dive on all of the chapters is pretty
Especially the
slim.
last ones.
I mean,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, but like if there, because like,
10.
yeah.
So if we
I
sort
mean,
of
if we
divvy them
have
up, so-
interest, like for me, agriculture, so like I'd be happy to take
Did you
on.
pick that one because it's not done yet?
No,
I know why you picked it. I know why you picked it.
I'm just saying that that might be a way to kind of help
I know, but-
all of us understand both macro and micro, kind of looking at things in
Right.
a broad stroke and also with more of a micro,
Is that something that we
magnified
could, you list the ones that are ready and say, here they are, and you leave a couple columns, say, put your name on the ones you want to deeper dive.
Yeah.
Does that make sense to folks?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
I really like that
And then
idea a lot.
reply all or
I just
something.
think
Yeah.
we're all gonna get the most out of it that way.
So is this gonna be available in like a wiki or a similar where we can comment on, or comments after the document, within the document, online, or anything like that? Because I think that could be really valuable too, especially if we could see each other's
I
comments.
mean, I guess you could do that with a Google Doc, right?
You know,
Just
or-
you can leave comments on a.
Yeah, I mean, I think at this level, at this point, it would be very valuable to get impressions on those things that, other people would find interesting, or trends that are highlighted, or surprising bits of information that we could reflect back to the community. It's not at the level where we need wordsmithing and editing kind of feedback. This
Right.
is more like
No,
reading the
it's
chapter.
Bullet points
Ideas.
of a major theme.
Yeah, so I think that,
It's more for adding comments than, we
Yeah.
need more discussion about this, or this, I think, is missing from this discussion.
let me think a little bit about that. I know that they're all available as PDFs, and I'm not sure everyone necessarily has the ability to make comments on PDFs, but there might be a way to do something
more
like that.
clumsy.
Yeah.
Or it might just be enough to come back and report
Yeah.
those things in the
Right.
meeting.
Here are
Yeah.
my bullet
Here-
points
here
that I
are
thought
bullet-
about my
yeah.
chapter.
Yeah.
That this is what
I think
learned
it
about
just
open
depends
space
on,
and growth.
on how we feel about the timing, what the, if we have the time to kind of all come together at the next meeting with that stuff, or if we feel like we need to have more time with other people's thoughts and comments, then
Mhm.
that might be, it just, how much time we have between now and getting what we need to get organized for the October meeting.
Yeah.
But I don't think with what you're giving us, it's just a first look. It's not like, oh my God, we have to have our thoughts in writing and agreed on. So just like an initial discussion of what you're finding, rather than,
Yeah.
if we don't say it now, it ain't gonna happen. So we've got plenty of time,
And it would,
I think.
I think it would inform the agenda for the workshop, because there are trends we're
Yes.
noticing, so we might want to highlight that for, I think
Right.
you said that.
Yep, definitely. And I think to Lacey's point, this is, your first strike at this. It's really what jumps out at you, what surprises you, what do you think is really interesting, and we can use that going forward. There will be plenty of opportunity as we go through this process to revisit these chapters. But the intent of the proposal and our approach was really to let's leave most of that technical inventory stuff to Greater Portland Council of Governments, so this group can focus more on the future and the looking ahead stuff. But they will have some very interesting things in there, I'm sure. We were going through the population and demographics in advance of the meeting tonight, and there's certainly some things that we're going to want to highlight. It'd be interesting to hear what folks around the table would like to highlight.
So going back to our discussion that we were having about the vision statement, and everybody started talking about where we were missing, or what we had as assets. It feels to me like two of the things that we all sat around this table and also heard at the Blueberry Festival was environmental assets / we heard a lot about solar power for municipal resources at the Blueberry Festival, and also we want more of a sense of community. That we all like each other. We live at a really nice place, and we'd like to have more opportunity to have places that we can gather. Is that right? Am I hearing?
Yeah.
Did I hear? In terms of vision?
I think that the solar thing would be interesting to incorporate somehow into the vision statement, not in terms of just solar power, but a renewable resource or
Renewable, yeah.
sustainable self-sufficiency. I think that speaks to a lot of different groupings of things. I'm not sure what everybody's intent was that wrote it
No.
down, but there's a few ideas that come out of solar power that are not just solar panels.
Right.
That's a
That
good
we
point.
could possibly incorporate into the vision statement.
Yeah,
I think.
self-sufficiency also hits agricultural.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it builds on the 2003 vision of the environmental assets not sacrificed for short-term economic gains. And it would be nice to build on the things of this. I mean, somebody worked really hard on this, just as hard as we're working on ours. So it'd be nice to take the things about it that are really valuable and bring them forward with us.
And part of, and I think I said this at the beginning of our first meeting, or some point during that meeting, that this is, not crumpling up everything and throwing it away that came before. We're building on that work. And part of what we want to do, in addition to, getting some reaction on those inventory chapters, is we want to make available, maybe since this comp plan, a list of other planning exercises, plans that have been adopted by the town council, policies that have been adopted by the council, because those are going to inform, those are statements of value as well and what's important. So I think we can use that as kind of a stepping stone for where we're going to take this effort. And I think that's a really good segue into, if you flip the page, I've attached an excerpt. It's an appendix actually from this American Planning Association document that I think has some good ideas for things that go beyond the main state statute that need to be addressed in a comprehensive plan. And we talked at that initial meeting about, hey, there are certain things that the state's going to want to see. And there are things that Gray is going to want to do because there are things that Gray is dealing with, and the opportunities that Gray has that not every town or city in the state of Maine has. So we have talked about solar, we've talked about the village, we've talked about infrastructure, we've talked about aquifers and other, environment overall. We've talked about the trail network at Libby Hill. But I think there's about 10 pages here or so that really focus on some more sustainable, equitable kind of considerations when it comes to the planning process and the planning document and planning recommendations. I wanted to introduce these. We don't need to walk through them all, but I want us to continue to talk and think about what this plan should be. We will have just a few minutes to look at a couple other plans, but I think this is probably the third time we've touched on this idea that, we have to do certain things to get a stamp of approval from the state, but there's a lot of things we can do because this is Gray, and Gray needs to do certain things. So, we've talked about a few things, but I thought this might also help generate some ideas as we go forward through the process. It may or may not factor into that October session. I think a lot of what I heard during the visioning discussion, I made some notes, and I know Sarah made some notes that are not just vision statement specific. They could be used as a part of a bigger discussion in October. So let's come back to this, these ideas. And if people want to talk about specific ideas at a future meeting, we'll make some time in a future agenda for that. But this is more informational. Take a look at it and see if there's anything that kind of seems to strike true or makes sense to consider implementing in Gray, whether it's energy, housing, stormwater kinds of considerations, economy, those kinds of things. All right, so we did get a projector set up, as everyone knows. So these plans are all very different. The plans, and there are links in your electronic version of this. I would encourage you to check them out for two things. One is the vision statement. Look at how they've structured the vision statement. Look at how detailed it is. See if there's, you might have an impression some of these people went crazy with their vision statement. It's way too much. Others, might be really good models to take a look at. The other thing I'd like to talk about, and we're going to need to provide some direction to our design professional who's a part of this team. I mentioned her at the beginning of the process, but Portland Design, LK, is going to be working with us on the actual layout of what is likely to be maybe 20 or 30 pages that sit on top of all those inventory chapters. And that's going to be the plan. We want to make sure, and we'll talk more about this in just a minute, but the idea is that we would have an attractive looking document that is easy to use and easy to understand, and it's going to be the kind of thing that town councilors can carry with them to every council meeting, and planning board members will have it as a reference, right, tucked into their ordinance binder. And it's going to be not a 400-page document that was done with a typewriter. It's going to be something that has a little more production value, a little more interest, that will help clearly communicate the priorities, so that 5-6 years from now, when the town's starting to think about, how are we doing with this? Let's, maybe think about updating this thing. It'll be easy to understand. So I think Alicia had brought up the Fort Collins plan. We don't need to go back to that one, but the way they visually use space on a page, I think, is really cool. The way they use design to communicate the vision is very cool. This plan is from South Portland, the one that's up on the screen right now. This is for the West End. It's, if people are familiar with Red Bank, it's over by the main mall. The way this plan uses photos to communicate objectives and incorporates mapping to tell the story about what they're hoping to achieve, I think is very compelling. They use color. It's not a typical Excel spreadsheet that's 7 pages long. They've got all of their highest priority recommendations listed on a page for each section, like on this page. So, and that gets to very clearly, what are the actions, who's responsible, and it's keyed with a map, which I think is a neat idea. The other plan that I know Doug had looked at before we got started with this process is the Windham Plan, where this was one that I was involved in, where we tried to come up with 4 big things. Instead of having 130 recommendations that the town had to do over the next 10 years, the idea was to say, look, what are the 4 most important things we need to work on over the next 3 to 5 years, so that it's not as overwhelming, it's a little easier to tackle in bite-sized pieces. And it used that graphic at the beginning to communicate what those 4 big things were and give a few examples around the edge. So that kind of used a concept of, instead of having a 400-page comp plan, why don't you try and put it on a page? And that's what the cover was all about. So those are the 4 big things, based right on the community values. Those are in the vision statement, and then the future land use map is tied to those. There's a number of other examples. Again, this one is really kind of a fancy Word document. Others are very high production value kind of documents. If you go to the maybe the Portland plan, this is a plan that was approved that same year as the Windham Plan was. LK worked on this plan, and rather than looking like a jazzy Word document, which is basically what Windham had, she was involved right from the beginning, helped establish, you know, the layout for the columns, where the pictures were gonna be, the kind of font, the graphic that carries through. If you look in the upper right-hand corner of that page, there's a half circle that's color-coded. So if you look at the whole plan, you can tell what section you are based on the color of that dot on the side.
It looks more like a brochure.
The entire plan is, that carries through
Yeah.
the whole plan. So the idea, again, because not every community is the same, not every community is the same size, not every community is throwing the same amount of resources at their comp plan effort. Excuse me. We had the concept of having Greater Portland Council of Governments do all that inventory stuff, which I think looks pretty good. It's formatted pretty well. But what we really wanted to focus on was, you know, I don't know if it's going to be 25 pages or 30 or 40 pages of actual forward-looking planning document that's going to get this full design treatment. We'll need to decide, you know, just some general parameters. You know, do we want landscape or portrait orientation? Are we going to design this primarily to be viewed from the town's website, or are we going to think about this as a printed and bound document? Those have different considerations. Are we going to, how are we going to use the page? Some of these plans are really dense. They have like a background photo and text over it. Others incorporate a lot more white space. I think that this is an example of one that looks like something you'd find on a doctor's office or something on a coffee table, where oh, thank you, sir. Where every chapter, essentially, in the plan is its own article, right? In this plan. So if you advance a little more through this plan, Sarah, what you'll see on Doug's belly is the, you know, every chapter has its own layout, and it has its own font, and it really reads like a magazine, right? I'm not sure if that's right for Gray. But what I tried to show is that there's a whole range of things you can do. And the state doesn't care. They don't care if it looks very much like what we had produced last time as a community, or if it looks like this document, where they talk about their public participation, buzz, 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 and they go forward from there. So I think part of this is going to be, you know, what's the right color scheme? What's the right layout? Do we have enough photos that we can use today, or do we need to go out and get some photos? I mean, that kind of stuff. It may seem very early to be talking about this, especially since we haven't had our first public meeting yet, but I think that this kind of early thought can, you know, if we send some ideas to LK, she can get back to us and say, you know, this is what it might look like, and we can have a little bit of that versioning before we even have content, and it makes it a little easier, I think, to have the conversations about what it's going to look like. So when we get to next fall, we're not trying to figure it all out then. We can focus on the content and the recommendations at that point. So we did say we'd save a few minutes to talk about the chair and the vice chair. I would.
Could I just, on the layout, I'm a form follows function kind of person. As long as the content is there, then I think, you know, the way that it looks and feels is superfluous, but I know other people don't think that way. I also think that if we have sort of like an overall vision of what the document format's gonna look like, we can do some branding on the project pieces as they go out, so the surveys can be branded. You know, it will feel more cohesive to people, I think, if we know a little bit in advance about how we're gonna produce this thing at the end of it. Yeah. So that would be-
I think that's a good point. And I'm not sure we just have enough time to talk about that this evening, but again, like a couple other topics tonight, want to introduce it, get people thinking about it. We can make some more final decisions as we go. We don't need to decide tonight. I would like to decide the chair and the vice chair approach, even if we say we need one more meeting, or if there's a couple of people who are willing to kind of take that trial run and be the icebreakers for the process. We can do that. So we've had a bit of a discussion at the beginning of the meeting, Doug, about the chair and the vice chair and what their roles would be, and talked about the possibility of, maybe every few months kind of readjusting the chair and what the role of the chair would be relative to the vice chair and relative to the council and support staff. So are there any other comments or questions? Do people feel like now's the time to make that decision, or?
Are we nominating people right now, or just discussing?
I think if there's any further discussion, now's the time. Otherwise, we could take some nominations.
I would like to make sure we're all on the same page about understanding what the chair and the vice chair role is. So if I understand where we had landed, it's the chair is gonna be somebody that you run the agenda by, and sort of as part of drafting the agenda for each meeting. The chair is gonna be responsible for making sure we stay on task during the meetings in terms of timing and things like that, or at least part of that. And the chair is going to report to town council potentially up to once a month.
Correct.
Those are the roles.
Yep.
And the vice chair role is to do those things when the chair can't.
Right. So I would expect to copy both the chair and vice chair on draft agendas, meeting materials, those kinds of things.
The hit by a bus theory.
Yes.
Win the lottery.
But we did make a final decision about the length of term for a chair versus a
No.
vice chair. So, do we need to decide that tonight, or would you like to decide that tonight?
I think if,
I think the question is, would we like to decide
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I think it's,
Sure.
I think first, is there anyone who's wants to, is interested in being chair, is the first question. I think Joel, I sort of tend to agree with Joel. I think rotating chairs could be
I would-
chaotic.
Right,
and,
at least frequently, definitely.
Yeah,
Maybe
and-
once, if somebody has to step down or something,
Yeah.
but.
I agree, I just want to give the person know that if, their life changed or something happens, that they just
Right.
couldn't do it, that they can pass it on to someone else.
Right.
If we're not gonna have a rotating, which I totally, actually, I agree with where everybody's coming from, would it make sense, and would it be allowable in our charter to do a co-chair option?
I think so.
And that way, if somebody says, hey, I'm interested, but I don't know if I can commit to the time during whatever. I'm a teacher and during exams, I can't be here. I don't know,
Right.
I'm making stuff
I
up,
like the
but
idea of a co-chair.
it's sort of,
There are no other committees that have a co-chair, but
It-
I don't know if it's necessarily off the table, but there are no other committees that do.
Wouldn't that really be what the vice chair is anyway? It's like, if you can't
Generally.
do something one time, then the vice chair.
they do it.
Yeah.
So,
So I have a
any
question.
volunteers?
Is there anyone on the committee, steering committee, that's not here tonight? Where does this sit? Bob?
There's one-
Construction guy,
Yeah.
the guy
Yeah,
that owns the.
Kyle.
What about the elderly lady too?
Kyle,
Mhm.
yeah.
I think she stepped
She
off.
stepped down.
Yeah.
Oh,
And-
she
and
did?
we
We
have
need to make
full
sure we keep focus on that.
contributing
She was a good person for that.
Yep, I have personally made no distinction between the two types of committee members who are, I think the council appointed, I can't remember, Core. and contributing.
Okay, yeah.
You're all committee members, as far as I'm concerned. I'll tell the camera that. And, the way the charge reads is that it says there'll be a chair and a vice chair. If you guys want to have a co-chair, I'm totally cool with it. That's essentially how I think I would treat the relationship anyway. We can call it a chair and a vice chair.
Yeah.
But who wants to do it?
Are there any volunteers?
Well, I should say I do have strategic planning experience. I used to run community programs at a community foundation, but I'm a little unclear what the time commitment is gonna be, so I don't know.
Yeah. I think it would evolve. I'm a little unclear, but my intent would be to keep it very minimal.
Okay.
It would be some email communications and maybe a phone call between regular meetings.
For the council presentations, I suspect the council could adjust their agenda such that the report for this committee could be towards the front of the meeting, so you don't have to, I've been to a lot of council meetings.
Stay for the whole council meeting.
They can get long. so.
I would also think that the chair could delegate some of those things. So the chair could perhaps say, okay, is there somebody here that's comfortable giving the council updates and has the bandwidth to do that? And delegate that task out and maybe move through people and, you know, I think the biggest commitment that I see is somebody is going to have to get a consensus from this group of people as well as the town and distill all of those ideas into something that makes sense. And that's gonna be hard and it's gonna require a lot of patience. And the ability to kind of move people. Like, we're gonna write this vision statement and we're gonna get a little bit married to it and we're gonna love it. And then we're gonna go to these meetings and the town people are gonna be like, I hate that.
Yeah.
And we're gonna have to figure that out and work our way through it, cause that's our job. But that, I think, is gonna be the biggest commitment, is the patience to get everything done and pulled together. I don't know, Ben, you've done this before.
I think that's a great job description for anybody around the table. It will be, I mean, thinking about the chair and how their role would be different, I think it would essentially be someone to run these agendas by. Again, maybe make sure I don't overschedule our 2 hours with 3 hours worth of stuff. Be a bit of a timekeeper, and I think be able to work with this group, but also probably to a large extent, you know, if you can delegate, great, but I think the chair is also going to be the one who puts their name on reports or will sign the top line of this is our plan, we're pleased to submit it.
I don't have a problem doing it. I mean, I have a lot of leadership management background, so
I'm happy to put my name into it,
yeah,
or as vice chair, you know,
yeah,
whatever.
doesn't matter.
Here we go.
Sure.
Yeah.
Is that good?
I vote for that.
Do you need to decide, or are you guys just like, if we were to vote for chair, and this is why I hate voting, it would, like, the person who gets the most votes be the chair and the second be the vice chair, or are you volunteering? Were you volunteering to do the chair or
I
the
could
vice?
be either one,
Yeah, me too, either way.
I have to.
Flip a coin.
Does not matter.
Why don't we vote?
Oh,
It would just
I
be
wanna
easier if
vote.
someone was like, yes, I'll do it.
Do either one of
versus-
you have a preference in which one you do?
Doesn't matter.
Flip a coin.
Are you interested in being the chair?
I would do it if I need to, I would do it.
This should be a decision you guys make. If
Oh, now you start talking.
if you guys want to, again, kind of go into this with the expectation, like, this is the way it's gonna be from now till next spring, and, you know, we can revisit it then, or, yeah, I mean, I think we've discussed the roles pretty much as much as we can, and we've made some information. It might be hard to make a decision without a vote. I don't know.
The council wanted this group to come up with their own chair. At the very, very beginning stages, there were some discussions at a council level about that, and the council said, no, we want to empower this group with the comp plan, and as such, it's not appropriate for the council to designate a chair. They were clear about that.
Yeah.
Are
You
you
guys are the-
interested too? I think you said you would do it,
I
but
would, but
you
if there are
do
other people
vice?
interested, I'm happy
Right.
to not do it.
Would you do vice chair?
Yeah, I guess.
Okay.
I mean, I'm really concerned about just the time commitment and
Okay.
just I just don't wanna drop the balls, with the agendas and things like that. I'm happy to present information to the town council like that. I sort of have at least psychologically convinced myself that I'm gonna be going to town council meetings. Just as part of this process, I feel like it's important to know like what's going on there and what is. So I'm sort of planning to be at town council meetings, and maybe not all of them.
Okay.
So I'm happy to do that part, but it's really just, the pre-meeting prep of I'm just not sure that I have the time to do that.
Okay.
So.
So, do we wanna vote?
I know
Versus there anyone else?
Yes.
I don't know
Anyone else?
Justin's background, I'm kind of assuming Alicia's background, I don't know your background, to know why you're interested or what you've done, so.
Do you want to?
Kind of like a.
I think that was
Like a
invitation.
resume?
Is that what you
Like
said?
a little, student council, give your little spiel.
Sure, no, so, I have a lot of management and leadership background. Restaurant management, I've done that for 16 years, and I was a director of operations for 4 years, and I managed 8 restaurants, and now I'm a consultant, and I have 36 restaurants that I help consult franchisees, so that's.
Well, I moved here 10 years ago. Before that, I lived in Boston. I worked at the Boston Foundation, which is a community foundation that not only does grant making, which I managed a portfolio for, but then we also implemented and began a lot of community programs and strategic planning efforts, both for the foundation and for individual nonprofit organizations. So I was involved with a lot of community planning efforts, not exactly similar to this because they weren't for towns, but we did work with a lot of public and private individuals at the city level and within the foundation, and again for nonprofit programs. So I was facilitating meetings a lot for grant making and also participating in strategic planning processes that are a lot like this, with vision statements and community input. I just haven't done it in a little while, but I'm happy to get the rust off my wheels.
Are you still?
So my background is, I am a consultant for health information technology. I founded a tech startup about 20 years ago now, and I work in the public health sector implementing electronic health records in nonprofit, federally qualified health centers, community health centers, and Indian tribal health centers. So in and around all of that, I have been a chief information officer, which is sort of managing the technology for an organization. So everything that plugs into a wall belongs to me for both a statewide primary care association and a academic medical center in Boston called Joslin Diabetes Center. So through that work, I do a lot of project management, a lot of meeting facilitation, a lot of strategic planning, a lot of tactical execution, and a lot of communication. So that's I'm a nerd. I'm really
clearly all
just.
three of you are comfortable speaking in public, because that seems like a big.
It's done by now, and I have to pick up
It
a
was.
child, so
Yeah.
I
are
was
we gonna
unprepared.
Yep.
vote quick?
So we're 5 minutes over. Doug, do you have one
Just
final thing to say?
real quick, 2 things. One is that I think it ideally, from a long-term perspective, at least from the town, it would be good if the chair was committed to follow the process all the way through. It would be hard, I think, to change chairs partway through. Second point is that there will be sort of, I imagine anyway, there are probably going to be subcommittees or little tangents of the comp plan. So for those members that would like to participate in more than just like a regular member, if you will, role. There'll be subcommittee or relative subcommittees probably along the way as a point. So.
Great, so we got 3 people for 2 positions.
Do we need to vocalize our votes or for like record keeping purposes or do we want to do something more like a?
Just need a chair, I think. That's
Yeah.
all it counts. Chair and vice chair would be the.
Yeah, so, again, if we're gonna vote, then maybe we should just go, everyone in favor of Alicia for the chair, and then Justin for the chair, and then Kristen for the chair. Krista. So,
And if you're voted for or not voted for, we still like you just as much.
I think that's the main thing. All right. So for Krista for the chair, please raise your hand. 3. For Justin as chair, please raise your hand.
Yeah, I don't know if we're voting first.
You can only vote once, right?
Yeah, yep.
No double dip.
For each position.
Yes. So raise your hand again, please, for Justin, voting once. 3, 4, and for Alicia, 2. Okay, so now we'll do Alicia and Kristen for
Tiebreaker.
vice chair.
Who's chair? I don't know.
Justin.
Thank you.
Justin is the
Okay.
chair, and Alicia for vice chair. 1, 2, and Krista for vice chair. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, thank you very much. That was
But I want to make a,
The homework, I know we're supposed to check the plans for the
all
vision
right. The
statements.
homework. I will send out another email with the
Okay.
homework. It's going to be looking at those plans, thinking about the additional elements, and the vision statement. We will have our next meeting as currently scheduled on September 16th with the possibility of a special meeting before October to get ready for those meetings. Does that make sense?
Makes sense.
All right. Thank you for sticking around, guys.
Lacey wanted to.
I just want to say something, like, I didn't pick
Thank you all
Alicia.
three for being
Yeah.
willing to step up.
Justin, Krista,
I didn't pick Alicia because I thought
Alicia.
one of you two guys said you don't want someone with a lot of opinion to be carrying the role of the chair. And so I value your contribution. I didn't want you to feel like
I don't-
you couldn't say it because
I
you're
don't-
the chair, vice chair kind of thing.
I don't feel any way about it. I'm super relieved.
Yeah.
I would have done it if I
Yeah.
needed to do it. I don't know, I'm not good at volunteer boards because I'm super bossy. Like I have limited threshold for,
She's very honest.
I'm very honest, but I have a lot of other things that I can do. So, and I'm happy
There'll
to
be
do that.
many other
Yeah, no, I'm happy to do that. I can take minutes like you wouldn't believe. Good. Yeah.
Oh,
Oh, you're
did you hear that, Doug?
I can type, I can do a lot of things. I'm good.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
I ordered a 50-pack of name tags. I thought that'll
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll see you guys.
See ya. Have a good night.